There's a room inside the Great Pyramid of Giza that has no right to exist, not because it is hidden, not because it is sealed, but because of what is inside it. Nothing. No body, no treasure, no writing on the walls. Just 5 enormous slabs of granite stacked on top of each other above the chamber that most textbooks call the King's Chamber. Each one of those slabs weighs as much as a modern freight locomotive. Each one was lifted 43 meters into the air and placed so carefully, so deliberately, that in certain spots you literally cannot slide a sheet of paper between the stones. When 19th century explorers first crawled into that space, they found something strange written in soot on the walls. And they found something else. The granite beams above them were fractured, cracked, as though something had hit the pyramid from the inside with tremendous force. And yet the structure did not fall. It has not fallen. For 4,500 years, through earthquakes that collapsed cities across the entire Mediterranean region, this structure has stood without moving. And no engineer, no archaeologist, no mathematician alive today can fully explain why those cracked beams are there, what force they were designed to absorb, or how the people who built this place even knew that force was coming. For most of modern history, we had a clean, comfortable story about all of this. And in 2025 and 2026, that story started breaking apart. Because something happened that had never happened before. Scientists took every single piece of data ever collected about the Great Pyramid, every laser scan, every internal measurement, every recorded angle and alignment from 2 full centuries of study, and they handed it all to Grok, the artificial intelligence developed by xAI, not as a search engine, not as a calculator, as a pattern finder, a system built specifically to detect relationships that human minds, with all their speed and intelligence, are still too slow and too biased to catch on their own. They did not tell Grok what to look for. They did not hand it a theory to confirm. They gave it no instructions about who built the pyramid or when or why. They said one thing: look at this. Tell us what you find. What Grok found was not what anyone in that room expected. And the more researchers sat with the results, the more uncomfortable the silence in that room became. To understand why the findings hit so hard, you first need to understand the story we were all taught, the official version. The one that has been printed in textbooks and repeated in documentaries for over 100 years and treated as settled, finished, done. The story goes like this. Around 2560 BCE, under the rule of the pharaoh Khufu, a massive workforce of Egyptian laborers, not slaves but paid workers, farmers pulled from the fields during flood season when the Nile made farming impossible, gathered on the Giza plateau. Over roughly 20 years, they quarried limestone from the cliffs nearby. They floated enormous granite blocks down the Nile all the way from Aswan, a journey of over 800 kilometers. They dragged those blocks up earthen ramps on wooden sledges using ropes, and they poured water on the sand beneath the sledges to reduce friction. They cut stone with copper tools and shaped it with balls of a rock called dolerite. They stacked approximately 2.3 million blocks one at a time until they had raised a structure 146 meters tall. For nearly 4,000 years, it was the tallest building on the entire surface of the planet. It is a powerful story. It is a story of human willpower and organization at a scale the ancient world had never attempted before, and in its broad outline, much of it is almost certainly true. We have found the villages where the workers lived, we have found their bakeries, we have found the graffiti they scratched onto hidden stones, the names of their labor gangs written in ink that has survived millennia. Nobody serious disputes that human beings with human hands built the Great Pyramid. But this explanation has a problem, and that problem does not shrink the closer you examine it. It grows. The problem is precision. There is a very large difference between stacking 2 million blocks of stone into a rough pile and doing what the builders of the Great Pyramid actually did. Because when you measure this structure with modern instruments capable of reading fractions of a single millimeter, you start encountering numbers that copper tools and wooden sledges cannot easily produce. Start with the base. The Great Pyramid rests on a foundation of roughly 13 acres. That foundation is level, not roughly level, not level enough for a building. The 4 corners of the pyramid's base vary in height by less than 2.5 centimeters across, a distance longer than 2 full football fields placed end to end. Modern surveyors today, using laser levels and GPS satellite systems, find it genuinely challenging to match that degree of flatness on a construction site. The builders at Giza are supposed to have achieved it with string, water channels, and human eyeballs 45 centuries ago. Then there is the alignment. The 4 sides of the pyramid face true north, true south, true east, and true west. The average error across all 4 sides is about 3 arc minutes. 3 arc minutes is 1/20th of a single degree. To put that in terms, you can feel the pyramid is aligned to true north more accurately than most modern magnetic compasses can actually read, and it was aligned this way in an era with no compass at all. No magnetic tool existed. The only reference available was the movement of stars across the night sky. Consider the stone joints. The outer casing stones that once covered the entire pyramid in polished white limestone were cut to a slope of just over 51 degrees. A Victorian surveyor who personally examined the few casing stones that remained described their joints as being as fine as the seam on a piece of high-quality jewelry, held together by a cement layer thinner than a human fingernail, gripping individual blocks that each weigh multiple tons. He wrote that he could not understand how such joints had been produced by hand. More than 150 years after he wrote those words, neither can we. Each of these facts, taken alone, can be brushed aside. Skilled craftsmen, people say. Generations of accumulated practice. Lots of time and lots of workers. That explanation holds right up until the moment you stop looking at each anomaly separately and look at all of them together. Until you load all of them simultaneously into a system that has no career to protect, no university reputation riding on a particular answer, no textbook waiting to be proven right. A system that has genuinely no preference between one explanation and another. A system that only follows the numbers wherever they lead. That is exactly what happened. And this is the point where the story moves beyond ancient Egypt entirely and starts touching something much larger and much older. The research team fed Grok the complete record. Internal geometry mapped by laser to the millimeter, the exact dimensions of every known chamber and shaft, the angles of the passages that thread through the interior like veins through solid rock, the astronomical alignments, the orientations to cardinal directions, the proportions of the structure, height against base, volume, total mass. Every measurement that any researcher anywhere had ever recorded about this monument gathered into one enormous data set and handed to the machine. Find the patterns, they said. Report what you find. Tell us what is actually here. Almost immediately, before it had even finished processing the entire data set, Grok flagged something in the pyramid's geometry that the researchers had not asked about and had not expected. It found it buried inside the relationship between the pyramid's height and the distance around its base. When you take the full perimeter, the complete distance around all four sides at ground level, and you divide that number by twice the height, you arrive at a number. That number is pi, not an approximation of pi, not something interesting and close. Pi, accurate to a degree that made the research team stop and check their input data 3 separate times because they assumed a decimal point had drifted somewhere. When they finished checking, the number still held. The Great Pyramid, built by a civilization that left behind no written record anywhere of understanding pi, encodes the ratio of a circle's circumference to its diameter into its own physical shape. It encodes it to a precision that mathematicians would not formally describe until thousands of years later, and even then, only after generations of very careful, dedicated work. Grok did not comment on this. It reported the finding and moved on, the same way a scanner reports a shadow on an image without deciding what the shadow means. But the researchers sat with it for a long time. There is a fair counter-argument to this finding, and it deserves to be stated honestly. Some historians suggest that the builders may have measured distances by rolling a drum of a known diameter and counting how many rotations it took. If you build using rotation counts, the mathematics of a circle become embedded in your dimensions automatically, without anyone ever needing to consciously understand what pi is. It is an elegant explanation. It requires no lost genius. It requires only a practical method, and for a while that answer satisfied the team. It should have, except that Grok was not done. Because pi was not the only mathematical constant hiding inside the stone. Woven through the proportions of the king's chamber specifically, in the dimensions of that granite room deep within the heart of the pyramid, Grok identified a second mathematical relationship, one that has absolutely nothing to do with rolling a wheel, one that no counting drum could ever accidentally produce. The golden ratio, the proportion that appears in the spiral of a nautilus shell, in the arrangement of seeds inside a sunflower, in the branching pattern of a living tree, in the proportions of the human body itself, the number that cultures across history in completely separate parts of the world have independently described as divine, because it seems woven into the structure of living things themselves. It was there, expressed in the relationship between the length of the room and its width, between the diagonal and the sides, to a precision that Grok rated as statistically overwhelming. Two constants, two of the most fundamental numbers in all of mathematics, both present, both precise, both encoded in a single structure built by people who, by everything we have been taught, should have had access to neither. One number appearing in an ancient monument might be a coincidence of method. Two numbers from entirely separate branches of mathematics, produced by entirely different physical processes, both appearing with high precision in the same place, is no longer a coincidence. An engineer who was later shown this machine's analysis reviewed the chamber's proportions independently, working through the geometry manually to make sure the software had not manufactured a false pattern. When he finished, he did not offer a grand theory. He offered one sentence. He said that whoever designed that room understood proportion at a level he associated with trained, experienced mathematicians, and that he could not see how it had been achieved through trial and error, because trial and error always leave some errors behind. There were none. Not one. Hold that thought for a moment. In a structure made of more than 2 million blocks, assembled over decades, in a chamber cut from granite so hard it still dulls modern steel-cutting tools, there was no drift, no accumulated error, no wandering at all from one wall to the next. The proportions held perfectly, as if the entire room had been poured from a single mold rather than assembled stone by human hands working in near darkness. Most people assume that mainstream archaeology has already fully explained the pyramid, that it is a solved problem, that the mysteries only feel like mysteries because we enjoy the feeling of not knowing, that comfort is understandable. But what Grok found next is the reason that comfort may not survive an honest encounter with the actual evidence. Because what it found next moved the story off the plateau entirely. The system was fed the precise geographic coordinates of the pyramid on the surface of the Earth, its exact latitude and longitude, and it was asked whether that position itself held any mathematical pattern. On the surface, this seems like a strange question. A building is wherever it was built. But the research team wanted to know whether the location had been chosen deliberately, whether the ground beneath that stone had been selected for a specific reason. The machine considered it. What it returned again was not what anyone expected. The pyramid's latitude, the number describing how far north of the equator it sits, matches to a striking and specific degree of accuracy, a constant tied to the speed of light. When the speed of light is expressed in a particular set of units, the correspondence appears. Grok noted it without claiming it meant anything, because machines do not make claims. They measure. And here more than anywhere, honesty demands that we pause. There are many numbers in the world. There are many ways to describe a location. Given enough constants and enough unit systems, a determined person can find a match for almost anything. And skeptics have said this clearly, and they are not wrong to say it. But Grok was not searching through countless numbers for a flattering match. It was given one site and told to look. And when it looked outward from that point, it did not find one isolated coincidence. It found the beginning of a line. When the system traced a path outward from the pyramid, along a bearing set by the structure's own internal alignment, and followed that line across the curved surface of the Earth, it passed through something. Then further along, it passed through something else. The researchers watching the line extend across the map went quiet. The line was not crossing empty ocean or featureless desert. It was threading directly through other ancient sites, places constructed by peoples who, by everything we have been taught, never made contact with each other, never shared a language, a tool, a trade route, or a single idea. Following the bearing east, the line crosses through ancient sanctuaries in the Near East, some of the oldest carved stone structures ever found, built by hunter-gatherer communities, who at that time, according to our accepted history, had not yet learned to farm. Continue further, and it grazes the stone terraces of South America, where blocks are fitted so tightly that no blade slides between them today. Grok did not decide these places were connected. It reported only that the angular relationships between them, the distances measured across the surface of a sphere, the bearings from one site to the next, were not scattered randomly the way unrelated points on a globe would be. They clustered. They repeated. They fell again and again on the same handful of ratios, the same fractions of the Earth's total circumference. Think about what it would actually require to place one monument on one continent and a second monument on another continent thousands of miles away across open water, so that the distance between them is a clean and deliberate fraction of the size of the entire planet. You would first need to know the size of the planet. You would need to know its shape with precision. You would need to measure a sphere you could never step outside and view from above. You would then need the ability to travel across it. And you would need a reason, a deliberate intention to want your buildings to speak to one another in the silent language of geometry across thousands of miles and thousands of years. None of that is supposed to have existed. Not then. Not for thousands of years after. An engineer who reviewed the network Grok had traced said that if a modern firm were asked to position a series of structures across the globe with these tolerances, using only the tools available before the invention of satellite positioning, it would rank among the most demanding surveying projects imaginable, requiring instruments and methods that took our own civilization's centuries of accumulated science to develop. He said the relationships were too consistent to dismiss and too precise to explain. He said that when he calculated the probability of them arising by pure chance, the number that came back stopped feeling like a probability. It began to feel like a signature. And this is the turn where the comfortable version of the story loses its footing completely. It is possible to accept that a single pyramid was aligned to the stars by patient astronomers watching the sky for many generations. That is extraordinary, but it is human. It is the kind of thing we can imagine our ancestors doing with enough time and enough dedication. It is something entirely different to accept that the same knowledge, the same precise understanding of the Earth as a measurable sphere, appeared independently at scattered points across the world in cultures separated by open oceans and by thousands of years, and that each of them chose to encode it in stone the same way, using the same constants, pointing at each other across the dark without ever having met. Grok did not offer a theory for how this happened. It was not asked to. It was asked only whether the pattern was there. It answered that the pattern was there, and that its confidence in saying so was overwhelming. But the finding that unsettled the room more than any coordinate or alignment was still coming. When Grok compared the sites along the line, not just their positions, but the quality of what was built there, the sharpness of the angles, the tightness of the stone joints, the precision of the proportions, it noticed something about the direction of that quality over time. The precision was not equal across all the sites. It varied, and it varied in a way that had an order to it, a slope, a direction. The oldest sites, the ones our own dating methods place furthest back in time, were not the crudest. That is what we would expect. That is what every instinct about history tells us to predict. Human skill begins rough and improves, generation by generation, tool by tool, until it reaches mastery. Progress moves forward. The past is always less capable than what follows it. But the gradient Grok found ran the opposite direction. The very oldest works, the deepest layers, the structures buried longest beneath accumulated centuries of dust and debris, carried some of the finest tolerances of all. The precision was highest near the beginning. As the sites grew younger, as the millennia rolled forward, the mastery did not sharpen. It softened. The angles grew slightly less exact. The fit of the stones grew slightly less perfect. The extraordinary precision that should have been the end product of a long climb upward appeared instead to be the starting point of a long, slow descent. Read that again slowly, because it inverts everything. It does not suggest that ancient builders were discovering and refining their knowledge as they went forward in time. It suggests they were inheriting something, receiving an understanding already complete, already fully formed from somewhere further back still, and then with each passing generation losing a small piece of it, copying an original they no longer fully understood, until the copies of the copies were only faint echoes of a thing that had once been whole. The machine tracing that slope was not watching a civilization learning. It was watching one forgetting, and forgetting has a shape. Grok took the tightest, most precise work, the earliest and most perfect stone joints, and calculated backward along the slope of decay to the point where that precision would have originated, where the fall began, where the knowledge was complete. And that point did not land in the age of the pharaohs. It did not fall anywhere inside the 4,000 years we are taught to think of as the whole of human history. It landed far beyond it, in a stretch of the deep past that our textbooks leave almost entirely blank. The end of the last great ice age. The period when ice sheets were collapsing and sea levels were rising fast. When something happened to the world that our oldest surviving stories, across dozens of unconnected cultures on every continent, remember only as a flood. Sit with what the machine was suggesting. Not that skilled people built a pyramid, but that the skill itself was a survivor. That it came down to the pyramid builders the way a sacred text comes down to readers who can no longer speak the original language. Still carried, still respected, still copied as faithfully as possible, but no longer fully understood. The pharaohs may have been the last careful keepers of an inheritance whose origin they had already lost. They were not the authors of this knowledge. They were its archive. An engineer reviewing the decay curve said he had never in his entire career encountered a manufacturing tradition that improved as you move backward in time and degraded as you move forward. Every technology human beings have ever developed, he said, either gets better over time or disappears entirely. This one did neither. It arrived already finished and then bled out slowly across the centuries. That, he said, is not how invention behaves. That is how a memory behaves. In March 2025, an Italian research team used satellite-based synthetic aperture radar combined with a new Doppler tomography technique to scan beneath the Giza Plateau without moving a single stone. After 7 years of work and 1.2 terabytes of data, they produced a three-dimensional map of tunnels and chambers extending nearly 2 kilometers beneath the surface. These findings have not been physically confirmed yet. Egyptian authorities have not yet granted permission for ground surveys as of mid-2026. But they raise the question that the whole Grok analysis had been building toward. How much of this place is still unknown? How much of what was built here has never been seen? Because the machine, having found the global network and the decay gradient and the impossible starting date, turned at last to the question that everyone in that room had been carefully avoiding. The possibility that the geometry was not decoration, was not accident, was not a builder showing off, but was written to be read. That the alignment across the planet, the angles pointing toward other angles across continents, the ratios buried in the stone matching ratios embedded in the sky, were not the expression of pride. They were the expression of intention, a builder leaving something behind for someone who would arrive long after the flood, long after the forgetting, long after the world had rebuilt itself and started asking questions again. Someone with instruments sharp enough to notice. Someone perhaps exactly like us. Someone exactly like the machine we finally built to look. What Grok decoded from that geometry was not a warning about a place. It was a warning about a cycle, about a return, about something that comes around again. The sites are not aligned to where the stars are now. They are aligned to where the stars were then, at the moment of collapse, as though the entire network is a clock that was stopped at the instant the old world ended, left counting down toward the moment it might end again. They did not build the pyramid to hold a king. They built it to hold a date. They buried that date in the one material patient enough to keep it through anything, the only library that survives a flood, a fire, a fallen empire, and 10,000 years of total silence. Stone. We built our own record on paper, then on glass, then on currents of electricity we cannot see and could lose in a single afternoon. They built theirs to last past the end of everything we know, and maybe that is the sentence that lands hardest of all from everything Grok produced across those weeks of analysis. Not that a lost civilization existed, but that it understood something we have quietly forgotten in our confidence about the future. It knew how a world ends, because it had watched one end, and it did not expect the people who came after to simply believe it. It only expected us to eventually become advanced enough to look, and honest enough to see, and perhaps frightened enough to finally listen. The machine has no opinion about whether we will. It only reported what the stone said. The rest belongs to us, to the room that went quiet, to the researchers who stopped calling it a tomb, and to you right now, sitting with a slope that runs the wrong way and a clock carved in granite still counting. So before you move on, here's the question, worth sitting with honestly. If the precision really does decline over time, if the oldest work is genuinely the finest and everything that follows is a fading copy, then were we ever truly the first to reach this level of understanding? Or are we the recovery? The ones climbing back up a hill that somebody else already stood on top of long before our history begins? Tell me in the comments which answer you actually believe. Because I read all of them, and the split on this one is going to reveal something real about all of us. And if you want to know which site Grok is being pointed at next, because there is a next, and the same pattern is already beginning to appear the moment it looks, subscribe now and tell me below which mystery you want fed into the system first. Choose carefully. Whatever you pick, it will look back.